I must say this is the situation we are faced with today after a year of what somebody, I think it's Hubert Védrine, it's Hubert Védrine, the former French foreign minister, calls electoral insurrections. We've had this wave of electoral insurrections, and I think it's quite an appropriate word, expression. So what we've seen over the past year is the rise of lies and transgressions in the media environment, and even what we've come to call the fake news phenomenon. And this is what I want to talk about today. I guess many of you have already been confronted with fake news in your own news environment, but the fact that it is now happening in a democratic environment is quite both interesting and troublesome and very troubling. There is this other expression to characterize this new situation, which is post-truth politics. You may have heard about it also, or we also call it post-facts politics. The expression actually goes back to 2010. It was first used by an American writer, David Roberts, who wrote in a magazine I had never heard about, but I did some research and I found it, and you may be interested in looking at it also. It's a magazine called Grist, Grist. It's from Seattle. And he used that expression. He was writing about a discussion of a bill about environment in Congress. And he described a political culture, I quote him there, a political culture where public opinion and media narrative have become almost totally disconnected from the substance of the legislation. So it was a kind of interesting sociologic phenomenon to watch. But in 2016, post-truth politics have become a factor in election campaigns. Obviously, in the United States, we've seen that, and I will come back to it because that's where it is most striking. But in the UK, with the Brexit campaign, where we had, for instance, Boris Johnson, when he was campaigning, he said several times that the UK membership of the European Union cost £350 million a week. Which was totally false. He said that Turkey would become a member of the European Union in 2020, and obviously that was completely wrong. So to have somebody of that, a high, very visible politician who was running in a campaign to say such falsehoods was something new, I must say, in our countries. It is becoming a factor also in France. In the presidential campaign, in the primary, we've had a few instances. For instance, some right-wing groups have, in the primary of the center-right party in November, one of the candidates was former Prime Minister Alain Juppé. And to discredit him, some right-wing groups spread the news that he had very close links with some Islamist groups and started to give him this nickname Ali Juppé instead of Alain Juppé. And this went round, and it became news to the point that in the debate, the organized debate on TV between the various candidates of the primary, it was an issue. He complained about it, and he said, it became part of the political debate, when at the beginning it was completely, all made up and invented and irrelevant. So in fact, I think 2016 has become, will be probably remembered as the year when fake news became a political actor in campaigns. Fake news being news that are deliberately planted in the news cycle, and usually through social networks. So this has been so striking and widespread that it has led us to ask, which is now a legitimate question: can fake news undermine democracy? And this is really something that is at the heart of a debate we are having now in our societies, among journalists, but also beyond the strict framework of the media organization. A lot of people are starting to wonder. President Obama, I think it was in an interview with the New Yorker, said, described the ability to disseminate disinformation, conspiracy theories, to paint the opposition under a terribly negative light without possibility to contradict it. And he noted that all this had accelerated and made the debate much more difficult. So we are now in an era where there's this paradox about the internet, that the internet was seen, and is still seen in many respects, fortunately, as a liberating tool. You know, it has, all of us here, whatever our political environment, it has been, it has completely revolutionized our job, and I think for the better, mostly. But now it is becoming also a tool for manipulation of the news. And it is, of course, it multiplies, it amplifies, obviously, the way these fake news are spread. That there was a BuzzFeed study recently which showed that the most read stories, including fake news on the US election, generated more activity on Facebook than the stories on the same subject, so also on the election, published in 19 mainstream news organizations altogether. So that means that, you know, on Facebook, these fake news have much more resonance than the real news, and statistically. And when you think that Facebook has 1.8 billion users around the world, that 44% of the people in the United States get their news from Facebook. The figure in France is 40%. I don't know about the other countries, but it's really a very, very big share of the people. You can see that there is really cause for worry here. So some news organizations have looked into this to see what was the origin of fake news. And we found, so some of them are politically motivated and others are just, I would say, commercially motivated. You know, maybe you've seen these stories in the New York Times. If you haven't, I would advise you to look for them, about these kind of little factories of fake news coming from Georgia, from Macedonia, you know, young guys who just found a way of making some money through the commercial, how would I say, progress, if you want, of those news and, you know, the clicks and the advertising. And others have found that some of those fake news originated in Russia, of course, or were amplified through robots and trolls and all these instruments that allow to amplify this phenomenon. So this is one way of creating those fake news. Then there's another dimension which helps those fake news to be disseminated, which is the filter bubble, the phenomenon of the filter bubble that we are experiencing. This has been, it's quite interesting. It has been documented by several researchers, and there are some books about it published in the US mostly. And it describes how through social networks we are drawn to live in closed bubbles, cognitive bubbles, if you want, because through algorithms and if you on those social networks, you're drawn to only listen to the people who think like you, because you're going to like the people who you adhere to, or you're going to follow the people who think like you, basically. And so you are less and less, because you live in this environment, and you get your news in that environment, and you read, and you then you are kind of encircled, and you are less confronted with different opinions, which probably you did, I suppose you did, you had more opportunities to be faced with different opinions when you were in a more open news or social environment. But now with those bubbles which filter the opinions that you get, you tend to believe only the people who think like you. So when you, by any chance, are faced with somebody who thinks the opposite, you are less able to believe it, because it's not so familiar to you, this opposite opinion anymore. And this is quite a dangerous phenomenon. Another dimension is, of course, the loss of credibility of mainstream media and of experts, and who are all included in what we call the elites, and what these electoral insurrections have shown mostly is a rebellion against the elites in our countries. So the elites are the political elites, the media elites, and the knowledge elites. We joke a lot about Donald Trump not being against the elites when he himself is so rich, and is obviously part of some elite, but it's not the same elites. The ones, I think, that people who vote for Trump or partly for Brexit or for Marine Le Pen in France rebel against are the knowledge elite, not the money elite, mostly the what we call the experts, and also the media. So Donald Trump, I think, has become the champion of fake news. It's been, for me, it's been something which I watched in amazement, because at the beginning I thought this cannot be true, and then I thought, okay, he's campaigning, it's his way of campaigning, but now we can see that even as a president, he's going on. I remember a TV debate. Before a TV debate, he was asked whether the journalist who would moderate the debate should be a moderator or a fact checker, because, in a TV debate, you can just say, okay, this is your time and this is your time, and you have to speak equal times. You can limit your role to this, but most of the time, the journalists tend to be fact checkers, which is that if the candidate lies, he will try to correct him. And so Donald Trump was asked, what do you think the role of the journalist should be, of the moderator? And he said, he has to be just a moderator, because let's argue and exhaust our arguments among ourselves. So you could see already, I don't remember exactly when it was, this interview that I watched, but you could see that obviously already he was rejecting the role of journalists as mediators. And that's really what his philosophy is about. He doesn't want the media to stand between him, mediator, of course, is being between, and a medium, and or acting as intermediary. And this, he doesn't want this. He wants to be to have a direct link to the people, as he says, to the voters. That's why he uses Twitter so much also. That's a fantastic tool for him to reach, I don't know how many followers he has now, 20 million probably. Last time I checked it was 19 million, but it goes up all the time. And so, yeah, he has a direct link to those 20 million people, and, without being filtered, without being contradicted. So that's really what he wants. And I think in his inauguration speech, he again said, I want to talk directly to you, the people. This is really, I think, the essence of the populist tactics and the populist philosophy, that you talk to the people, and those who didn't vote for you don't exist. The populist traditionally excludes those who are not part of his group. And what we see in the US is, I'm talking about the US because unfortunately this is a model which is being very much in fashion across Europe also. So we are really, the French journalists, and I think my German colleagues also, probably the British also, are watching very closely what's going on in the US at the moment, because we have our own election campaign this year, and we know it's going to be very much in the same vein. We can observe the same phenomenons somehow. So now you can see, because the media are fighting back, and I will talk a little bit more after this about how they fight back and how we can fight back. Now his strategy is to discredit the media, because he doesn't want the people to believe the media, or to trust the media. He doesn't want the trust to come back. So there's a big battle going on. A lot of mainstream media are in fact gaining readership now, which is good news, because the people who disagree with Trump or have problems with this philosophy are trying to look for reliable sources of information, and they probably think that these medias are a good source. But so Donald Trump sees the danger, and he says, okay, no, the journalists cannot be trusted. What did he say to the CIA? He went to the CIA, of all places, and said, the journalists are the most dishonest people on earth or in the world or whatever. So we are labeled now as dishonest, and he has really to push this point to discredit the media. So you can see that trust is becoming central again. Trust of the readers towards the media, but also the trust of the media towards their sources. Because now what happens is that if politicians, who are elected to rule your country, cannot be trusted, what happens? We've seen that it's not only Donald Trump who lies; it's also his spokesman now. In the first briefing he made he gave in the White House, it was terrible, because he again said several things which were obviously false. And when one of Donald Trump's advisors was confronted with this in a TV program the next day, Kellyanne Conway, she said, but he gave alternative facts. So this is another amazing thing, that we are given a new concept now in news. We thought we had facts, and inventions or myths or whatever. Now we have facts and we have alternative facts, so whatever that is. So it's becoming really quite interesting. So the media who are faced with this problem of facts, fake news, alternative facts, are now wondering what can they do, what should their strategy be, what can they do? And I'm sorry, this is a little bit confusing. Yeah, it's okay, because I was hearing this translation. So some media think they should boycott, for instance, the briefings of the White House if they think they are not reliable, if they think, and I think CNN decided not to broadcast live the first briefing of the spokesman. Others, media are saying, look, this is an opportunity. Maybe it's a good thing that we don't have to just follow the official line, and we should go behind enemy lines, in fact, and dig ourselves, and, look for our own sources of information. It's will be more difficult, but it's more challenging. But it's a way of challenging precisely this strategy of lies and fake news. You can see that the media now are very much part of the fight, and you can. This is happening. I'm describing this situation in America because it's the most spectacular, and because the United States is supposed to be, the media are supposed to be the fourth estate and to be so powerful in that country that it's quite paradoxical that this is where it's happening now. But we have a comparable situation, though, with differences, of course, in Poland, for instance, where there is also a populist government which has been elected, democratically elected, and the main newspaper, called Gazeta Wyborcza, is really involved in an existential political fight, I would say, and it's a new role for media like this. It's very difficult, I must say, for editors and for journalists. It's very complicated because the line between even in the New York Times, sometimes I wonder, you can see that the line between being just a news organization and being just a reporter or a journalist and being a political organization or being an activist, this line is being blurred, and it's confusing and it's troubling for many of us. But I think it's an environment which we have to take into account and to know that it's going to be with us for some time. I would like just to finish to look at some some ways that journalists try to use to fight back. So one, for instance, there was a story in the New York Times the other day, which you can find very easily on the internet. It was published on a couple of days ago, January 22, so 2 days ago. And it's called White House Pushes Alternative Facts. Here are the real ones. And it's very easy. You have, here are the statements by the president and by his spokesman, Mr. Spicer. That's his name, Sean Spicer, the White House press secretary. So they quote the statement. In a speech at the CIA on Saturday, Mr. Trump said the news media had constructed a feud between him and the intelligence community. They sort of made it sound like I had a feud with the intelligence community. It is exactly the opposite. So then the New York Times said, in fact, Mr. Trump repeatedly criticized the intelligence agencies during his transition to office. And then they quote, the number of instances where he criticized the intelligence agencies and the media, and so that completely contradicts what he said. Second example, Mr. Trump said of his inauguration crowd, it looked honestly like 1.5 million people, whatever it was, but it went all the way back to the Washington Monument. And then they look at the pictures, they ask experts of, how to assess the size of crowds, and they find that obviously the crowd was about a third of the size of Mr. Obama's inauguration in 2009. So, and there are 7 examples of statements that either the president or his spokesman made, which are obviously false, and the paper just shows very clearly, very easily, with facts, that these are false. So I think that's a very powerful way to do it, if you can, of course, if you have the facts available, but here it was very easy, actually, to do. Another question is how does it really reach a wider public than the average readers of the New York Times, but that's we'll see that over time. I think it's a very powerful way of fighting back. There is another way that we use at Le Monde, and many news organizations use it actually. In French, we call it les décodeurs. I don't know what would be the equivalent in English, but it's a kind of fact-checking. Every time a politician says something which you think is either wrong or manipulated, or you go, you look, you dig, and you check, and very as quickly as possible you put on your website a rebuttal, what you have found. So with other sources, with experts interviews, with background checks, and you just check and tell the readers this is what we found. Now we are putting out a new tool that our technicians have put together. It's called Decodex. And this is just to find what websites are fake, because there's a lot of news coming from fake news websites or fake experts websites, or, it's more and more sophisticated, of course. So I don't know how technically this is done, because this is not my thing, but it has been shown to me we will put it in service next week. It's like a search engine, a small search engine, and if you have information coming from a website that you're not familiar with, you enter it in your search engine, and we have a data bank of about 800 fake websites that we know, and so you can see whether this is one of those fake websites. It's not much, because obviously this is changing all the time, and as your data bank has, let's say 800 websites, and the next day there will be more, but it's a good way of starting to fight back, and not to let this happen without resisting. And last thing I would say, we have to put pressure on big companies, social networks, Google, Facebook, Twitter. We really have to, and they are starting to react, but it's slow. They feel uneasy about this because obviously they see that there is a problem, they see that they are being used, but of course they're here to make a profit and it's their business. But we have to show to them, to convince them that this is hurting their business, that this is their business is also about ethics and free society and open society, and not manipulated information, and open society, that if they are being used against this objective, it's not a good business for them either. So this is something we are trying to do as news organization. We try to work with them. They are receptive, some of them, but they also have their issues, like Facebook. Mark Zuckerberg, the CEO of Facebook, recently said, but we cannot be seen as an arbiter of truth. Yes, it's true. I mean, they're not going to be, but they have common sense. They can also use this just like us and just like our readers. So these are a few suggestions, but I think it's, as I said, we live in a very different environment and political environment in the West. It's different from Russia, but I think this is really going back to the heart of our job as journalists, which is, trust, truth, and these are the same questions we all ask ourselves all the time. So I will stop there, and I'm happy to answer your questions if you have any.